All the clips you're about to see were shot using the Insta360 X3 and edited in the Insta360 Studio desktop app. Okay, so once you've downloaded the Insta360 Studio app from the website, it will open up to this, the home screen. Not too much going on at the moment because we need to import some footage to bring up the editing options. So if you look in the top left, you can see you've got local files and camera files. If you've got your camera or memory card connected to your computer, select camera files and then locate the files from there. If you've got them saved to your computer like I have, keep local files selected and then just locate where they're saved and import. So let me just import these for us to play around with. Cool, so once they're loaded, they will all appear down the left hand side of the screen. You can change the list view by pressing these buttons at the top. You can change it to a thumbnail view or a list view. I like to keep it on the default, and then double clicking on one of the clips will send it for editing to the timeline. In the top at the middle of the screen, you can see you've got your 360 view or your reframe view. For editing, keep it on reframe. And then moving over to the right hand side of the screen, you've got all these different options. So let's start from the top and work our way down. Stabilization, if you want your footage to be nice and smooth, keep flow state stabilization on. So if we play this clip of me walking, you can see with the stabilization on, it looks nice and smooth. And then if I turn the stabilization off and then play it again, you can see a massive difference. It just makes the footage look all shaky. So keep flow state stabilization on. Under that, you've got direction lock. This basically changes the angle of view. So the angle of view follows the camera rotation if it's on. So this might be helpful if you've got like bike shots or walking shots. Next tab down is the stitching tab. If you've got any accessory or lens guard on, select that from here and it will help with the stitching. Then under that, you've got the stitching optimization. So if you ever have any issues with the stitch line, you can play around with these and it may help. I always find 9 times out of 10 that the software does a pretty good job at stitching the line, so I haven't really had to play around with them too much. There's been a couple of times where I've played around with it, but you can see if I turn the optical off now, if you look around my neck, you can see as I play around, that's where the stitch line is. So with it on, it's like that, with it off, it's like that. So I think it's pretty accurate, but if you have any issues with the stitching, this is where you'll come to and you'll be able to mess around with all of this and try and make it better. The next tab down is the media processing. So you've got Color Plus, Clarity Plus and Aquavision. Color Plus, turning it on will basically just enhance the color. Clarity Plus will make it sharper, and then Aquavision is if you're shooting underwater. I personally keep Color Plus and Clarity Plus off. I find that the color is too much with the Color Plus on, and then it makes it a bit more difficult, sometimes impossible to color correct it later when once you've exported the video. And Clarity just makes it too sharp. I haven't shot underwater yet, so I can't comment how good the Aquavision is, but it might work for you keeping these on, or one of them on or one of them off. It's all about playing around with it and seeing what works best for you. Under that, you've got the audio settings. The next tab down is logo settings. If you want to add a logo to your clip, this is where you'll do it from. The next tab down is your project management. So let's say I want this clip, but I want it in a different view. So let's say I want the camera rotated behind me rather than facing me. I can create a new project, and with the same clip I can just rotate the camera around, so I've got that view and I've got the view from behind, but it's just the same clip. Next tab down is your file properties, just your frame rate, the file size and your resolution. Okay, we're now going to move down to the bottom of the screen where all the magic happens, the timeline editing area. If there's one thing you take away from this section or the whole video, it is keyframe, 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 keyframe. So let's start to reframe this video. To move the camera angle round, get your mouse on the preview window and press down and literally just move it round to wherever you want it to go. That's the beauty of this. You can have the camera facing wherever it is you want, up, down, left or right. To start on this clip, we're going to have me in the center, so we'll leave it about there. But because I've made a change, I need to add a keyframe. Anytime you make a change, you need to add a keyframe. To add a keyframe, you press this plus icon down here. That will bring up this window. You can mess around with all of these different options, changing the view to the tiny planet, crystal ball, the default, which is quite fisheye. Fisheye? Fisheye. I don't know if fisheye is a word, but we'll make it a word. Fisheye. Anyway, I prefer the natural look. It does crop it in a bit, but it doesn't make it as fisheye. But there's no right or wrong to this. You can just play around with all of these different settings, and then whatever you think looks best, just keep it at that. You'll see that it's added a keyframe onto the timeline, which is this yellow dot here. So anytime we make an adjustment, we need to add a keyframe, and then you'll start to see all of the yellow dots appear down the bottom. So if we play this clip now, you can see that the camera's now pointing down towards me, because that's where we chose the keyframe to be. So let's say as we get around the corner, I want the camera to pan up a bit towards the street. I'll get my mouse onto the preview window, press down and then move the angle round. And then because I've made a change, I need to add a keyframe. So we'll press the button there, a new dot appears, a new keyframe is born. Because this keyframe had a natural view and I want to keep it consistent, I'm going to change the view here to natural as well. So you'll see now when we play from the first keyframe, as we get towards the second keyframe, the viewing angle changes towards the street. If you think that the camera movement between each keyframe is too fast, if you press in the middle of the yellow line between each keyframe, it brings up the transition box. You can play around with all of these different transitions to work out which one you think works best. If I keep it on smooth dissolve right now and then play it again, can't see too much of a difference on this example. But if I was to change it to, let's say, a bit more of a faster one, you'll be able to definitely see it faster. See how it does it exactly how the line showed. So it kind of did it or fade in, fade out. That's a lot more faster. Personally, I usually keep it at smooth dissolve, because I like the camera to be nice and I like the camera movement to be nice and smooth like that. But if you're going for a faster look, then obviously use a faster one. So let's continue walking around, and now let's say we want the camera to move round behind me. So we'll change it to like there. Change the view, so press keyframe, change the view to natural so it's consistent. And then if we go back to the second keyframe, as we move around the corner, the camera changes towards the back of us. And then let's say we want to move the camera angle back round to me, get our mouse, press down on the screen, back to the center. And then we've made a change, so we need to add a keyframe, natural view. Go back to the previous keyframe. You can see that now it's moving around towards me. Add a smooth dissolve transition, so it's nice and smooth. What I have noticed is the shorter time between each keyframe, the quicker the transition will be, because obviously it has less time to do it. So what I mean by that is, if you look at this is a bit too fast for me, this pan, but I've put smooth dissolve on and that's the smoothest I'm kind of going to get. But if I move this keyframe out, which by the way you can just literally drag the keyframe to a different point in the video if you have decided you want to change it. If you see now, the pan is a lot more slower because it's got a lot more time between these two keyframes to actually pan. So this is definitely more of what I would want to go for in this clip, a lot more of a smoother pan of the camera. Whereas if I bring it back close, look how quick it is. Which again doesn't look bad, but if it depends what look you're going for. If you decide that you don't want this keyframe anymore, or you don't want that keyframe anymore, or you don't want that keyframe anymore, you just click on the keyframe and you can delete it. Or if you decide that you want to, let's say we go back to this keyframe and we decide we don't want it to look that way, we want it to go a little bit more like that because my head was showing, you can just edit it like that and it will save it. So any change you make on this timeline, you need to add a keyframe. If you don't, then it's not going to save that new angle that you've moved the camera around to. So next to keyframe, we've got deep track. So if I delete all of these keyframes that we've put in, and we start back at the beginning with me, let's say we want the camera to follow me around this street, so we don't want it to pan any other way like we just set our keyframes to. I've deleted them now so you can see that it's basically following me, but because I've got direction lock off, which remember we talked about earlier, the camera is kind of moving at its own free will, and at this point I'm clearly not center. So if I want the camera to track me but I don't want to sit here and do individual keyframes, I can turn on the deep track option. So get deep track, then I'm going to draw a box around me and press start tracking. That's literally going to track me all the way around up until the point where I tell it not to, and keep me in the center of the frame the whole video until I tell it not to. So this is a much quicker way than sitting there doing individual keyframes. So let's stop that there and we can watch it. So you can see now as we're walking around the corner, I'm always in the center of the screen because it's tracked me all the way through. If we didn't have that, then we would have to sit there and manually do it with each keyframe, which you can do as well. If you don't like that deep track, you can delete it or change the view by pressing on the yellow box and then removing it like that. Next to deep track, you've got time shift. So let's say we wanted to speed this up. I'd click on that and then you can see this red box appears. Drag it across the timeline for the area you want to speed up. So let's say we want to speed up this whole area and then click down on the mouse. It will then lock that in, and that by default is 2 times the speed. You can do it all the way up to 64. But this clip in itself that I've got is only a, how long is this? This is only a 20-second clip, 26-second clip. So for me to do it 64 times the speed will probably make it something like 3 seconds. So if we do that and then let's say lock in 6, you can see down here, this shows you how long the duration of the clip is actually going to be at the new speed. So currently 7 seconds. You can also do the reverse of this and slow it down by taking it the other way, which will obviously increase the length of the track. So it's now 1 minute 34. And then if you don't want any of that, you can delete it as well. Next to time shift, you've got motion blur. So if we bring back the time shift on quickly and we just put the time shift there, you can see now the motion blur option has turned to yellow. That's basically showing us that within this sped up bit of the track, we're going to have motion blur. But the key thing to remember here is the motion blur is not going to appear on the preview window. It will only appear once you've exported the video. So don't be like, oh, where is it? It's not working. Like da da da. Nah, don't worry. Just it's cool. Once it's exported, it will show the motion blur. It just doesn't show it on the preview window. Next to that, you got your zoom in and out, and that is not zooming in and out of the picture of the video. It's just zooming in and out of the timeline. Above that, you've got 3 options on the video preview window. Ratio, so you're able to change the ratio. So if you wanted it like TikTok or Instagram Reels 9:16, you've got the option to kind of reframe it like that there. Under it, you've got take a snapshot. So if you wanted to take a snapshot of literally just that, just take a snapshot and choose where to save it. Or if you want to view your video preview in full screen mode, just click that and then it takes you to full screen. Back onto the timeline, you've got 2 markers either end at the start and at the beginning. These are important when you're exporting. You can also set them by using these buttons here, setting the marker trim to start, setting the marker trim to end. So let's say this yellow cursor that we've got, we want the start point to be there. I can either drag it manually like that, or I can just press it there, and let's say we want it to end there, I can either drag it from the end, or I can press the end point there. I usually just drag it along. I find it's a little bit more accurate. Well, it's not any more accurate actually. It's probably more accurate to use the buttons, but I don't know, I think I've just got into habit with dragging it. Whatever works best for you, it's one of them ones. But yeah, those are the two options there. But remembering, when you do go to export, which we'll talk about in a minute, if you leave the marker start at the beginning and you leave the marker end at the end, and you only essentially, let's say, want this middle bit of like 10 seconds, it's going to export the whole video because it exports where the markers are. So you need to make sure that when you go to export, you're only selecting the bit that you want to export. It's the same idea in Premiere Pro. You set your in and out points. This is the same idea. You need to set your in and out, because if you don't, it will just export the whole video. Once you've done all of the magic and you've made it all fancy, you need to hit the magic button in the bottom right, the export button. So once you press it, you've got various different options as your export settings. If you want to export your reframed video, which is what you've just reframed and put all your keyframes in, etc., obviously keep it as that. If you want to export the full 360 video, then obviously select that. Your reframed video, just choose the name and where you want it to be saved, and the bitrate, it doesn't really make any difference going above 50. I usually just keep all my exports at 50, and I found the quality is fine at just that. Resolution, here you can change it if you wanted to put in the 4K dimensions. This is where you would do that. And your frame rate, I have found though, when I've shot in 60 frames per second, which I have done in some clips, let me just show you an example. Let me find a 60 FPS clip. So this shot that I did here, I shot in 60 frames per second, but when I go to export it, it gives me the option to change it to 30, which is pretty cool. So if you've got a 60 frames per second video that you want to export as 30, this is how you do it. But you can't do the reverse, so if you've got your 30, you can't export it as 60. But I thought that was pretty cool. So once you're ready and you've adjusted all of this stuff, you can either add it to queue or you can start the export. If you add it to queue, so let's say we add it to queue here, along the left hand side you've got your export queue. At the moment we've obviously only got this video that we've just added. Once you're ready, let's say you have a list of like 5, once you're ready, just right clicking on the video and pressing start export will start the export. Or if you want to start the export straight away instead of adding it to a queue, you can do, and then once you press start export, you'll see that the progress will appear down here in the bottom left. And the good thing is, whilst it's still exporting, you can still go back to your clips and continue editing, and it doesn't slow the software down. It's just as normal as if it's not exporting, which is pretty cool. So you can continue doing all of your bits and pieces, and when it's done, you'll hear and see it's done, because it does like this little chime, like da da da. And then once you've got your exported video clips, they then become normal reframed video files, which you can then import into your normal video editing software and just use as normal video clips. And that is pretty much it. Just mess around with it, have some fun, import some test shots, just play around with the angling, the keyframing. There's no right or wrong to it, it's just what you think looks best. So don't stress about it. If you want to check out my full Barcelona cinematic video where I took the X3 and got some pretty cool shots, I'll leave a link in the description below.